Perfect. So yeah, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of the Junior Migration Seminar for giving in general, the opportunity for junior researchers to present their work, and also would like to thank the audience who is now participating with us. So today I'm happy to present my joint work with Riccardo Turati on the impact of immigration workers protection. The current status of the work is that we are now about to make working papers soon. So now it's a perfect time if there are any feedbacks, comments, or questions. So any feedback at this time is more than welcome. Okay, so since the last 60 years, we are witnessing an increase of migration from 77 million to 277 million, which approximates to about 3.5% of world population. Migrants, by participating to the labor market of the destination country, so they can influence the labor market. So mechanically, they influence it by affecting the size of the labor force. They can change the skill structure of the working force. And the last point, which we're also going to rely on our paper, is that migrants can bring with themselves their own norms, habits from their own origin countries. So what is the research question of this paper? So we ask, can immigration, both in terms of size and composition, impact the law regulation in the destination country? So basically, so far, both the theoretical and the empirical literature assumes implicitly or explicitly that the labor market regulation or the law is exogenous to the size and the composition of immigrants. And so far, to the best of our knowledge, there are no studies looking on how immigrants might affect the law or the regulation in the destination country. Okay, so there are some studies on the other way around. So how does the regulation impact migration, but not the other way around? What we're trying to examine here. Okay, so this paper fits in three broad strands of literature. The first one is on immigration and various labor market outcomes. Here I'm going to mention just a paper here by Edo and Rapoport on labor market outcomes of low-skilled, and there in that paper, they, for instance, emphasize that certain regulation, or in this case, the minimum wage, has a different impact. So the immigration has a different impact on the natives when the minimum wage changes. The second strand of literature is on immigration and various institutions. So there are papers on norms and institutions, market functioning, the experience of institution productive capacity, and voting preference. So I'll mention the last one. So the most recent one here in that paper, the Bali and Sankova, they say that what they do is they are looking how immigrants can affect the voting preferences of the natives depending on different labor law protection. So basically, they're saying that if there is higher labor law protection in the country of destination, then the natives have a more mild opinion or preference towards migrants. That's the most recent paper. And the third strand of literature that this paper contributes is on legal transplant. So this is a strand of literature in law and economics. So basically, in the paper of Berkovits and Katarina Pistor and co-authors, they show that what matters when so those was in the times when there were colonizers and when there were the changes in the legal systems and legal laws, and what matters for current development is not only the legal system itself, but also how that legal system came into place. So the way the new systems were adopted, they argue that it's more important than the legal family or the legal system itself. Okay, so so what do we mean by workers' protection? So basically, we use lexemetric dataset. This dataset is built by a group of legal scholars at Cambridge. So they labor lawyers at Cambridge. So they basically created this dataset, which you can track from 1970. We use the data from 1970 until 2010 for 70 countries. Across 36 different labor law variables. There are 5 main dimensions. So the first one is on employment forms. The second one, working time, worker dismissal, worker representation, and industrial action. The first dimension is on employment forms. It relates to, for instance, does the law take primacy, or is the law more important compared to the contracting parties when determining the status of the worker? Do, for instance, part-time workers have the right to equal treatment as full-time workers, and so on? So there are 8 variables in this dimension. Then working time. So for instance, are workers granted overtime premia? Are there certain maximum daily working time, and so on? On worker dismissal. So for instance, is there a notification of dismissal? So how big, so when a worker is fired, how long does he need to be notified before the dismissal, and so on. So basically we use these 5, because these are laws. Some of them, usually, if we would just look at a single law variable, they usually have very small variation over time. But if we look at more of them, then we are able to get a more fuller picture of the whole labor law situation in a given country. And we create an index using the factor analysis of these variables, and that's how we create our workers' protection index. And just wanted to mention that these 5 broad areas approximately correspond to the paper by Botero and co-authors. They were working in the cross-section. Here we are in a panel, and the methodology, and these 5 broad dimensions correspond to the methodological basis that was used when constructing the doing business reports. Okay, so after we took those 36 variables and we take the average from 1970 until 2010 and plotted out, we see that there is some cross-country variation in line what one would expect. Common law countries such as US, Canada, UK, Australia. So basically common law countries, they have a lower regulation, lower workers' protection, whereas continental Europe and Latin America, they have a higher workers' protection. If you want to just do some cross-sectional and put some variables, we see that if we want to examine the determinants, we see that indeed the common law is so whether a country belongs to common law, civil law is one of the most important variables determining the level of workers' protection. But there is also GDP and democracy are 2 other variables that are important for the cross-sectional variation. However, in our analysis, we're not going to exploit so much the between variance, but we're going to exploit the within variance. So we see that, so if we plot out the workers' protection over our time of analysis, basically the workers' protection here in blue is increasing systematically over time. If we want to disaggregate it by OECD high-income countries and non-OECD high-income countries, we see that high-income countries have a systematically higher worker protection on average. And on the right-hand side, also what we were, and on the right-hand side, we see that, as I was mentioning before, basically the civil law countries here in green have a systematically higher level of workers' protection compared to common law countries, which is also which was also many times it was also mentioned by in the seminal papers by Laporta, Schleifer, and co-authors. Okay, when we use if we use our proxy, our workers' protection variable, and we search for some other sources of workers' protection or regulation variables. The one that we could find that had a long time dimension was the OECD Employment Protection Database. That database goes from 1990 until 2010. It covers a small range of countries. It covers 33 countries. And if we correlate our index with the OECD here, individual and collective dismissal, and in panel B, if we correlated with the strictness on, so it's basically on temporary contracts, on the protection for temporary contracts, we see a strong and positive correlation, significant at 1% with our measure, giving. So this is simply to give some external validation to our proxy, just to show that our measure is correlated also with some other data sets. Okay.
I'm sorry, if I might stop you just for a second, since you're talking about the measure. Somebody asked whether or not you have information about the enforcement of worker protection.
Okay, yeah, so this, I was maybe not super clear on this. So with the workers' protection, we are measuring law in the book. So these are laws that are written in the book. So this is de jure, not the de facto law. Okay. Afterwards, in our analysis, we're going to use some de facto controls, basically, to try to put these two dimensions together.
All right, thanks. Thank you. Carry on, please.
Thanks for the clarification question. Okay, so on top of this link that we're trying to understand better, the immigration workers protection, we acknowledge the importance of on other dimensions. So the worker protection in general is a proxy, can be seen also as a proxy if a country cares about the workers' condition and for the fairness in a society. And also the worker protection is also or the regulation is also related to labor market outcomes. So here we just put correlations. We just do simple fixed effect regressions, and we regress our workers' protection index on unemployment, labor productivity, hours worked, and Gini. We look at the contemporary and at T-1, or T is a 5-year period. So we allow for some for a lagged effect, and in line with what one would think. So having high regulation leads also to higher unemployment, since the employer would have higher costs of employing a worker. The workers having higher workers protection decreases the number of worked hours, since the working hours, it was, as I was mentioning, it was it's regulated with the workers protection. So if also the workers are working less hours, they can also be more productive. So we see a positive correlation with the labor productivity. And here, interestingly enough, there is a negative relationship with Gini. Okay, going to the immigration. So for the size and the composition of immigration, so we're going to measure the size of immigration as looking as simply as share of immigrants, simply defined as the share of migrants over the population in 2000. For the composition of immigration, we create an epidemiological term following Spilimbergo, where in his paper he was looking at the effect of return migration of educated people on democracy. And so in a similar way, we construct this index by looking at the weighted average of the workers' protection index, and we use as weights the share of immigrants coming from country of origin O and living in in country D over the total immigrant population. So basically this this index or this epidemiological term is capturing the degree of workers' protection experience and brought by the immigrants from the origin country. We use, as an empirical model, we use a dynamic panel model, because this is especially important since the law is a very persistent variable. We're going to see that the beta is basically 0.8, indicating high persistency. Our two variables of interest are the share of migrants and the epidemiological term. We have a vector of controls that can affect at the same time our two variables of interest and the workers' protection, such as GDP, political regime, human capital. We work in 5-year periods. This is to address the medium run perspective of law changes, because it takes time before a law can be changed. The law is usually, especially the labor laws, they don't change from 1 year to another. They take a few more years to materialize. Okay, so we estimate this equation, our main equation, with the system GMM using both internal and external instruments. So our two main variables of interest, so the epidemiological term and the share of migrants, they are instrumented with the external instruments using shift, share, and gravity. And all the other variables, we instrument them using internal instruments. For the internal instruments, we treat them as endogenous. We keep the exact same log structure for, for transparency, and not choosing some ad hoc, to make some ad hoc choices. We do a sensitivity analysis to different log structures. Yeah, that's the part for the internal instruments. For the external ones, so we use for the epidemiological term, we instrumented using the shift share instruments. So we predict the bilateral stock of immigrants by here we have the total migration, and we multiply it with the historical with the historical distribution of migrants in 1960. And so yeah, this is how we predict the bilateral stocks, and then afterwards we check for. So in the literature, there are concerns, of course, about when the shift share might not work, and so there's by Yeager and Goldsmith Bicknam. So we basically check if the pre-1960 indicators are not correlated with the variable that we're instrumenting, and basically we look at, for instance, of the GDP per capita, population, the common law, and we don't find that they are significantly correlated with our variable that we're trying to instrument. And we also look at the ADAO correction for as there could be some initial, there could be correlation in the error term due to similar initial distribution of immigrants. For the other variables, so for the size of immigrants, we use the gravity instrument. So firstly, we estimate a pseudo gravity model based on Feder. So we here on the left hand side we have the predicted migration bilateral stocks, and here we just multiply the distance with the period. So this is to capture the decreasing transportation cost over time. We estimated with the PPML because there are many corridors, so we have many zeros in the diet. So we estimated with the PPML, and then we use the predicted coefficients from the gravity model to compute the predicted bilateral stocks, and then we use them to compute the predicted immigration shares that will serve as our external instrument for the size of migration. And yeah, for the exclusion restrictions, so yeah, we use a very parsimonious gravity model to minimize the potential issues of that could rise from the exclusion restriction, and then we test them. We test both the shift shear and the gravity, and our f-stats here are yeah, well above 10 when we check them individually. Okay, now the baseline table. So this is our baseline table. So basically we start from the most parsimonious specification in column 1. So we have our lag dependent variable, and we have our 2 variables of interest. And then we gradually are adding the set of controls until we arrive to our benchmark module in column 4. And basically, so we have for the first coefficient, we see it 0.8. So there is high persistency, meaning that we're able to predict or to explain the law changes to a large extent with its past. Okay, that's one part. Then we don't find that the size of, so we find no effect, and if so, these are small effects, and if anything, these are very small effects in terms of for the size of immigration. So basically, it means that it doesn't matter much if we have a high share of migrants in the destination country. That doesn't matter for the change in the workers' protection. But what is interesting, what we find is for the composition effect. So here for the epidemiological term, so basically we find here a positive coefficient, which means that to give you an example, if we have, for example, France, which is a country which has high workers' protection, and the US, which has low workers' protection. So if we have in a country, in the third country where we have a lot of migrants, no, or let's say that all the migrants go from France to the US, then the workers' protection in the US will increase, and the other way around. If we're going to have a lot of migration from the US to France, then the workers' protection will decrease. Okay, so that's the logic, and so this can be explained as, yeah, we're going to see the mechanisms, but for the moment you can think about it. One of the ways you can think about it is through migrants bringing their own habits, norms, what they're used to, for example, in their country of origin, and then if they come from countries with low workers' protection, that will decrease in the destination country, and the other way around. Okay, then we check for alternative effects, and we do a set of falsification tests. So we check firstly for diversity, polarization, and skill selection. So with the skill selection, unfortunately, we don't have data on going from 1970 until 2010 to see. We're not able to see the education of migrants. What we're able to do is, so we look at, we have the degree of, we can identify whether migrants are high skill or low skill in, we have data, we use the data in year 2000, and we create a skill selection index. We create also diversity index, following Bahar and co-authors, and birthplace polarization. So maybe somebody could say, maybe this is the story. So when we include those alternative effects, our story of the epidemiological term still holds. Then so somebody could say, okay, maybe it's what matters is not the absolute value, what I was telling you, so going from low level or high level of workers' protection, but maybe it's the relative distance of the workers' protection between the countries. So here in column 5, we check for distance instead of the levels, and it's not the case. So what matters is not the absolute, the relative distance, but rather the absolute values. What matter for the evolution or for the change of the workers' protection. In the last 2 columns, we do falsification tests. So instead of looking at the weighted average of workers' protection, we put, instead of the workers' protection, we put the GDP. So maybe the migrants are bringing with themselves some productive capacity and other other things that could be correlated with GDP, and we find that this is not the case, so that's not the story. And in the last falsification test, we randomized, so we put the workers' protection values, we allocated totally randomly to different countries, and the results, and that's not the case. Okay, then we do a battery of robustness checks. So we remove the last, for example, 10 years after the crisis, we removed the upper quartile, which is 14 countries of both of the share of migrants or the workers' protection. We work in 10-year periods instead of 5-year periods that we are working. We use different epidemiological term proxies. We add additional control. So here we add the rule of law, which is the de facto additional control. So here we add the rule of law index and or the civil liberties. So this is more on the de facto side rather than the jure what we're capturing. So after including these variables, our the epidemiological term still holds. We also add, since I'm here, we also control for the informal sector, so the size of the shadow economy, economic freedom, and trade, and the main findings.
Since you're there, if I may stop you, for those who have not seen the Q&A, somebody was also suggesting that you take into consideration to control for the party in power, which should be feasible, as Riccardo said. So, you know, just to point out that somebody referred to this. Okay,
yeah, thanks. That's a good point, because for example, in I can go quickly back to the graph. In Latin America, there is only Chile that has a much lower workers' protection, and that was due to the, for example, the Pinochet regime, and we were checking that. So when there was the Pinochet regime, there was a huge drop in the workers' protection. So yeah, that's we can definitely include. We partially already control for it by including the polity. So if that would be a change in the political party that goes from a democratic to autocratic, we are already capturing with the polity. But yeah, this might be more precise, or might capture something else. We look at heterogeneous effects by development or by legal origin. We don't find heterogeneous effects for the size or for the composition story. Okay, now we want to understand more the mechanism. So we found these aggregate effects, and now we want to understand a bit more what are the possible mechanisms. So to understand that, we do three things. So firstly, we decompose our dependent variable into the 5 subcomponents that I was mentioning you in the beginning. So instead of the aggregate workers' protection, we change the outcome variable, and we put each of the 5 subcomponents. So the industrial action law, the worker representation law, worker dismissal, working time, and employment forms. And when we do that, we basically find that the epidemiological term holds for only for 2 out of the 5 dimensions. So it's affecting mostly the workers' representation law. So that's on unionization, strikes, and so on, and employment form laws. So working on part-time and so on. So these are the two main dimensions that migrants can affect in a destination country. We discuss what are the other possible mechanisms. So there could be, we call them direct effects. So a direct effect would be migrant going to the destination country, and he is going to change the workers' protection through voting. So voting for parties that are more pro-regulation or less. This could happen because we work in 5-year periods. In some countries, migrants can get the citizenship after 5 years, so they can vote. But yeah, but we consider this rather to be a small effect, because it would be only for a small country, and not all of them apply for citizenship, and so on. Also, they could affect natives' behavior through networks or through interaction. And for this, we don't have the data to test this, but we wouldn't expect this to have a huge effect. For what we do, so what we we also look at the indirect effect. So here we provide some suggestive evidence. So these are correlations. So here we don't have any good or very convincing, let's say, IV. So we look here at what are immigrants' union participation and how that can impact the political debate. So I put here the correlation chain that we test. So basically we see that, so we're using the European Social Survey data. We see that migrants here this is World Value Survey European Social Data. Basically, migrants on average, immigrants, they are unionized less compared to natives in both data sets. Okay. Then we look at the correlation between the epidemiological term and the unionization rate. We see there's a negative relationship between the epidemiological term and the unionization rate. And then afterwards, we look at the political preference for labor groups. This is basically, we use here the manifesto database, which is looking at the political manifesto of a political party and how many times, or what's the share of times they are saying positive things here, because this is a net favorable position related to labor groups. And basically what we see is that so given that our story is that because we have a lower unionization rate, there is a political it's a political economy argument, so that by having a lower bargaining power due to the smaller size of the unionization rate, the political party in their manifesto, they're going to talk much more about it. They're going to be more pro workers protection or pro regulation, and we see a positive correlation in that, and that's one of the mechanisms that we are able to test with data. And then the last part, we just in the discussion, the simulations. So if you want to, we just take the long run differences here of the workers' protection and of our two main variables of interest, and we basically see if you want to plot it out. So in general, we can say that during the 1975 and 2010 period, that the aggregate effect is that the immigration has, on average, decreased the workers' protection in OECD high-income countries. The only exception is Greece, and this effect is driven by the share of migrants is counterbalanced, or it's this is mostly driven with because they have a lot of immigrants coming from countries with high levels of workers' protection. That's counterbalanced by that. And then we do different alternative scenarios. So we assume that okay, everywhere, across all the countries, the epidemiological term increases by 20%. What would happen? What would happen if all the countries had the value of the epidemiological term the same as the UK or France, are two representative economies of high scale of highly regulated or high workers protection, low workers protection, and what would happen if each of the variables would continue with the same trend. And basically there's some heterogeneity, of course, then in the magnitude of the effects, but when we relate those variables with the labor market outcomes, so with the first table I was showing you, then we see that the what could be a potential labor market implication would be that on average, so immigration would is decreasing the workers' protection, is decreasing unemployment and productivity, and on the other hand, it's increasing the hours worked and inequality. And to conclude, so we used a sample of 70 developed and developing countries from 1970 until 2010. We built a workers' protection index composed of 36 de jure labor law regulations. We find that immigrants have a medium run, so because we were at a 5-year period, they have a medium run and long run impact on the destination country's law, more precisely workers' protection. this happens mainly through the epidemiological effect, which is driven by the level and not the difference of the workers' protection coming from their country of origin. The effect is rather substantial, and the results are robust to different and competing effects, such as I was showing, the diversity, polarization, skill selection. And then in terms of mechanism, the effect is particularly strong for worker representation laws and employment forms laws. And one of the suggestive mechanisms that we are able to test is that lower immigrants' participation to unions in the destination country and a stronger regulation position towards the unions is one of the mechanisms. So it's basically trying to balance out. So the unions are basically trying to balance out the reduction of unions' power. That's one of the mechanisms we're able to test. So that's it. Thank you for your attention, and yes, please let me know if there are any questions, remarks, or suggestions, or you can also write us an email or contact us. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Adam. We actually have 15 minutes for questions. Let's see if somebody types a question. In the meantime, I would like to ask a question. If you can go back to the previous slide, please. So, no, the very last one. I was wondering whether you can observe in some way different rates of unionization for different extents of the epidemiological term. So meaning whether you can distinguish, migrants that are high epid versus low, whether they have different unionization behavior, and whether that might affect your mechanism. I mean, that's one question I can come up with.
Okay. Yes, I think we can. Yeah, we didn't check that. So for the moment, yeah, we were just looking at. We didn't disaggregate it in that way as you were suggesting. So yeah, we can check that.
Because basically what you're saying is, if there is an inflow of migrants with which bring about an increase in the epidemiological term, you have basically an increase in the index through a fall of the unionization rate. But if you go the other way around, what happens to the unionization rate? That was my question. And we have also a very long question by Sean King, which I'm going to unmute in a second. But before that, Sulin also asked a question, so I'm going to unmute them first. And so 2 questions coming up.
Okay.
Just a second. So Sulin, how do I mute her? There you go, please.
Hi, Adam. Thank you so much for the presentation. Really great work. So I have sort of a question on the interpretation of the results. So do you see yourself as confirming Collier and Borjas in the sense that you do find that the origin country's institutional setting influences the destination country's institutions in terms of workers' protection? So you frame it positively in the sense that the worker protection at origin will encourage worker protection at destination. But what about the reverse? So if you have very bad workers' protection laws at the origin country, are they going to negatively affect workers' protection at destination? You've hinted on something in the OECD context, but I would like to hear a bit more on your thoughts about the import of bad institutions in that context, and whether you kind of look at that splitting the sample into migrants coming from origins where the WPI is below destination or above destination. Do you do these kinds of splits to find out where this convergence is coming from? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So can I address them now or collect the questions?
As you prefer. You can probably answer this straight away.
Yeah, I prefer to go question by question. So so for the looking at by subs, so we are not able, so we cannot split the sample into two because we are having 550 observations, and then if we split the sample in two, then with the GMM and so on, the coefficients, if you go around 200 and something so on, then the sample size is a bit too small to make a proper inference. So we cannot do by splitting the sample in half. But in general, going to your question, so indeed, so what this measure is doing, so we look at both sides. So it's both. So if migrants are, so what this measure is capturing, so is if migrants are coming from countries with higher workers' protection, that will that will increase the workers' protection in the destination country, and the other way around. If the migrants are coming from low worker protection countries, for example, from the US, and they go to France, that will decrease the worker protection. We are not saying which one is good or bad. What we do is we relate them to economic outcomes. So here we relate them to the labor market outcomes, and afterwards we try to do some simulations. There are other dimensions such as fairness and so on. So if you want to make a full some welfare analysis, you would also have to take into account other things, and not only these four. I would say not only these which are important, but there are also other dimensions that should be considered. So overall, yes, it goes both ways. The effect. I don't know if maybe Riccardo would like to add something on this point.
Hi, thanks, Sulin, for your question. To be direct, since you pointed out if we believe in the story of Collier and Bojas, the point is that what we are finding is pointing in that direction. So that origin matters, and origin institutions, so the institution, the norms at the origin country matters. It's from one side, I understand that, okay, if you flip the story, the implication could be kind of worrisome, I would say. But that was one of the, let's say, main results of what we found so far, that in the end, this specific context, so looking at workers' protection institutions, it seems that what these migrants experience in some way in the origin countries has implication in the destination. And we try to come out with a story that could be convincing or not. We can discuss about it. But exactly, we believe that there is something that of the origin that matters in the destination country. So to be yes, in the end, this is what we are finding, at least.
Okay, and thanks for both of you for your reply. We have a question by Sean, who's inquiring about the time series of this WPI index. So I'm going to unmute.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi, Sean.
Hi. I was very interested in this WPI index you were using, and then I'm not sure if I understood right, but I was surprised to see the graphs. Were they saying that like employment legislation or worker protection has increased since the 1970s?
Yeah.
Okay, I was just surprised by that. For like the general feeling I had, and then say I'd be more familiar with like the OECD index for employment legislation, and like I just generally had the impression that employment legislation has been weakened over time, and I was wondering, have you compared with other say measures, or do you have any thoughts about this? Thanks.
Okay, so I mean, so these are the variables that we took. So here we listed, well, we are listing, yeah, the variables related to employment form, working time, worker dismissal, worker representation, industrial action. So basically take all the possible variables that was created by this group of labor lawyers. And I mean, when we plot it out, we see that it's that the workers' protection is increasing over time. And so this is the OECD, what you were mentioning, and we see that in OECD countries it has increased. So for these dimensions, this is the average effect for those variables that were mentioned. It increased more in high income countries than in low income countries over the 1970 and 2010 period.
And if I may add one thing,
I got it well.
Yeah. Exactly. We tried whether our measure is robust to alternative measures available, like the one I guess that you were mentioning concerning the OECD. So we tested the relation with data from the OECD dataset on the strictness of the employment protection, both in terms of temporary contracts and the dismissals. I don't know if they were the things that you had in mind, Sean. Yeah. And exactly, this is what we found. So in the end, the correlation is extremely high.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Well, if I may pitch in on this, it actually strikes me a little bit that you find this increase. I mean, at least as it regards labor market, as it regards contracts, flexibility, there are. I mean, I just checked the OECD chart, and I see either them staying constant or decreasing. So perhaps the other factors that don't pertain to contracts flexibility, maybe dismissal laws, or I don't know, the employment forms, or I mean, it would be interesting to see probably by type.
Yeah, so
I think what Sean pointed out is a nice remark. Yeah.
Yeah. So we did. So yeah, we didn't. So this is the plot for the aggregate. Maybe if we would make this plot for these 5 dimensions, there is quite a big chance that for one of these 5 dimensions, it's, for example, on the working time, it's probably, as you're seeing on the OECD, it's probably flat, or maybe it's a bit decreasing for one of these 5 dimensions, but the aggregate is increasing. But then in our analysis, we are so we checked the epidemiological term for in the mechanisms. We were checking the effect for each of these 5 dimensions, and we found that it's particularly strong for so it was here for worker representation laws and employment forms. So the effect was going mainly through these 2 guys, and we were not finding effects for other 3 dimensions.
Okay, thanks a lot for your presentation. If somebody else yet another question, you can go ahead. Otherwise, you can just write to the authors. The chat will be sent to you. I hope you gathered some nice feedback, and I guess Yajna wanted to go ahead with the presentation of the next, unless you want to ask a question.
No, I'm just saying Celine asked to ask questions, so you can go ahead if you have another question, Celine.
Sorry.
You can.
Sorry to hold you back, but I was just one question on the potential mechanisms. So I just have Germany in recent years in my mind when I think about the association between immigration and workers' protection. And it's almost like a political reaction to immigration. So basically protecting the existing workforce, so non-migrants typically, from the competition of immigrant workers that might dump wages, for instance. And you might see the same effect for instance, people coming from origin countries with lower worker protection, they might be coming from countries that are also culturally distant or linguistically distant and all of these things. So do you think you may conflate sort of a leftist worker protection reaction to culturally dissimilar migrants rather than sort of these other effects that you had in mind? I mean, that wouldn't undermine your main story. It would just be a different mechanism.
Okay. Yeah, fair point. For the just for in the main story, we were including a diversity measure, but okay, but you're here more talking about the mechanism. Yeah, it's a fair point. Yeah, from the top of the head, I don't know how we could do that. I can, maybe Riccardo, you have an idea, but for the moment I cannot think about anything.
Not at the moment. For sure we can think about it. Exactly the point. Because in the end, exactly, just talking like this randomly, the point exactly is to try to explain why the epidemiological effect that is computed on based on the workers' protection origin at the origin country is the one that in the end has an impact on the workers' protection in the destination countries. We can think about something also to cultural dissimilarity, as in the end, when we try to construct other measures of the epidemiological term based on other things, seems that doesn't matter much. So there is really something that is connected between the labor market regulation, let's say, at the origin with the one at the destination. We were thinking something in terms of political mechanism, totally, because in the end, we don't find any other way to change the law from changing the political system. I mean, the political actors. But yeah, we can try to play something more in that part. We are not. I mean, we are trying to find a robust and convincing story concerning the mechanism. I would say. I mean, we are convinced about the results. We are working a lot on find a more complete story as possible. Because exactly, for instance, trying to do something with the cultural dissimilarities could be a nice guess. Thanks.
Great. So thank you all for your questions. If you allow me, Adam, I'm gonna share my screen.
Yeah.
So thank you all for staying towards the end of this session. So let me just quickly present the coming up presentation. So next week, I'm going to be presenting my job market paper on whether naturalization is a passport for better labor market integration, giving evidence for a quasi-experimental design. So that will be on October 26th at the same time as today. And so you can see all the upcoming presentations on our websites, and all the links to register for each sessions are already there. As usual, we review all the papers on a rolling basis, so you can always send us our paper if you're interested to present at the seminar at the junioreconomic@gmail.com. And as you know, the seminar is now a weekly seminar, so it happens every Monday from 5:30 to 6:20 Parisian or Central European time. Thank you all for being here, and we hope to see you next week. Thanks, Adam, and thanks, Riccardo, for a very nice presentation and a nice discussion session today.
Okay, thank you all for being and participating. Thank you.
Bye.